Satohu was a spineless virgin loser who almost unalived himself when he got friend-zoned by his crush. However, everything changes when he follows her to a magical world, becoming the hero but now is forced to clap 5 princesses to unlock all of his abilities.
No more, please, Professor.
Years ago, when little Satohu was hunting for dung beetles in the woods and suddenly saw a portal opening. Having a brain the same size as a green pea reduced his survival instincts to 0, so he went to check it out and saw a girl named Hime walking through with her grandfather. After asking for his name and introducing herself, she made him promise not to tell anyone about what he had seen and promised to become his friend in return. It has been exactly 10 years since that night, and like every other morning, Hime sneaks into his room to wake him up for breakfast. On the way to school afterwards, she expresses how excited she is for their last day of the session, while he obsesses over the rings bouncing on her melons and thinks back to the day she said something about them being extremely important. After school, he meets up with her for a firework festival and spends most of it trying to build up the courage to admit that he loves her. When he eventually finds the most romantic spot to say it, she suddenly tells him that she will be leaving with her grandfather the next day. Later that night, he tries to think of the perfect way to say goodbye, but when the same portal from before appears in the woods, he realizes that she is about to leave and runs out to stop her. Despite all this pleading, she reminds him of her duty as a princess and says goodbye before walking through the portal. Right then, he decides to follow her and jumps in, before ending up in the middle of a marriage ceremony between her and a prince. When they all notice him, a dark beast suddenly crashes into the hall and knocks her grandfather out, so everyone starts telling Hime to use the power of the rings. All of a sudden, she kisses Satohu to activate its power and gives him the second one. The prince she betrayed then tosses his sword to Satohu, and he charges it up with the ring's light before cutting the monster in half and passing out. Hours later, he tries to enjoy a warm bath, but Hime shows up with her cakes uncovered and says they are now the royal couple. While she explains that the kiss automatically makes him a hero destined to save their world by defeating the Abyss King, he struggles to keep his glizzy under control. Just then, the palace gets attacked by more dark beasts, so they both run out to meet the guards, who then tell Satohu to save the honeymoon for when their lives are no longer at stake. When they tell him to do his job as the hero, Hime tries to stop him, but her grandfather shows up and says she should have thought about the danger a hero has to face before exchanging mouth juices with him. After getting him an axe, her grandfather explains how to channel the power of the ring correctly, and after successfully charging up the axe, Satohu reminds Hime that he chose to follow her. He also promises to do whatever it takes to protect her world, so she gives him another kiss to increase the ring's power. Moments later, he manages to save a local from one of the beasts and asks Alabaster why they were all referring to him as a powerful sage, but when he tries to explain, they sense a powerful aura before seeing a dark night in the sky. Satohu then ignores his warning and tries to attack, but almost becomes a hospital vegetable after getting slammed into a brick wall. After they both manage to escape into the palace, Marsh shows up to distract the Dark Knight before telling Satohu to run into a carriage outside the kingdom's gate. Several minutes later, they finally get to a safe distance with Hime as well, and when Satohu asks if the rest of the kingdom will be safe without him, Alabaster explains that he needs to get stronger by recovering all 5 rings first. Upon remembering the sloppy kiss he got for the first one, he asks if he has to do the same with other women. As Alabaster then explains that he will have to clap 4 more princesses to become overpowered, Hime tries to hide the rage boiling inside her. Later that night, they find an inn, and the newlyweds get settled into a room. But when Hime tells Satohu that she has no problem with sharing his glizzy to other possibly thicker baddies, he suddenly starts squirming in pain. She then makes him take off the shirt and gets emotional about the number of bruises all over his body before running out of the room. Several minutes later, Satohu finally finds her, so he professes his love.
Hime, I'm in love with you. It's true. I love you. None of this is your fault. I'm here. There's nowhere I'd rather be.
Hearing the confession causes Hime to get emotional again. But this time, she admits that she has just been scared for him and a little jealous of the fact that he has to smash other princesses. She then promises to love him no matter what happens, but when they get back to the room and realize that it's time to prove their love with action, they both start shivering. However, Satohu finds the courage to pin her down, and the sudden dominance causes her floodgates to burst open, but he suddenly pulls away. When she asks why, he says there is no way their first time will be in a crusty old inn and promises to make sure she can't walk for days when the time comes.
What do you mean by that?
After managing to at least share a kiss, they spend the entire night fighting demons, and by morning, Alabaster expresses his disappointment because he had stayed up waiting to hear the good stuff. Moments after explaining that they have to start by locating the princess of the Kingdom of Elves, they leave the inn, but upon arriving at Ronka, a sky-high tornado almost rips off Hime's plot armor. Alabaster then explains that the elves sealed themselves off from the rest of the world 50 years ago for reasons he still doesn't understand. Just then, a monstrous bear appears, so Satohu tries to figure out why feminists always pick them over men and almost becomes its lunch. As they all run for dear life, two elves pull them into a secret passage too small for the beast to enter. After Satohu introduces himself and asks to be taken to their princess, Hime tells him to expect some hostility, but the elves turn out to be chill dudes. However, before taking them in, they tell him not to expect much from the princess. Several minutes later, they get to the throne room and see Princess Nephrites hiding behind a throne. When she suddenly asks if they have committed the sin of sucking faces, Satohu gets embarrassed, so Hime decides to be the mature one and says they need the Ring of Wings so he can get stronger. All of a sudden, Nephrites flares up and accuses them of being spawns of the devil before running away. As they try to figure out what just happened, another elf shows up and introduces himself as Jade, older brother to Nephrites and Prince of the Kingdom. Without giving Satohu a chance to do the same, he orders a bunch of guards to arrest him and claims that it's a part of the usual protocol. Moments later, he tells Satohu that Nephrites can be a little immature at times, but when he agrees, Jade completely loses it. He then explains that she just needs some brotherly love and assures Satohu that he only has to be a prisoner for 80 years so she can have enough time to grow into her responsibility as princess. After he leaves, Satohu gets a surprise visit from a female elf with enough milk to feed an entire daycare. Instead of getting freaky, she holds his mouth shut and asks if he plans to use the rings as an excuse to play with different types of royal kitty, but he claims to only want Hime's happiness. She then says that a simp can always be trusted and proceeds to open a secret passageway before taking him to the temple where they keep the Ring of Wind. Just as he asks why it's not with Nephrites, they see something crawling in the distance and hide behind the walls. The next moment, Nephrites displays her godly beauty and starts seeking guidance from the statues holding up the ring. This surprises Satohu, so he asks if she has a mental problem, but Peridot explains that the statues are actually her parents, the former king and queen, who sacrificed their lives to create the Tempest Wall, keeping them isolated from the rest of the world. Satohu then tries to ask another question, but Nephrites hears them and starts demanding to know who they are. After a foolish attempt at making bird sounds, he climbs out and swears that he means no harm, but the shock causes her to lose consciousness. Peridot then makes him carry her all the way to her home and offers some tips to help him get the job done before leaving. Moments later, she wakes up, so he once again tries to show that he isn't a threat, but ends up getting soaked with everything she ate for breakfast. By then, Jade has just heard of her disappearance, so he heads over to Satohu's cell and becomes convinced that he had something to do with it. When Peridot suddenly shows up and tells him to accept that she is probably already climaxing on Satohu's glizzy, he practically goes insane. She then also tells him to accept that the current state of their kingdom is destined to fail, but that causes him to become suspicious, so he decides to go search her place. Meanwhile, Satohu and Nephrites have just hung up their clothes to dry, and she starts apologizing for soiling the feared Ring King, who apparently has the same physique as Prime Captain America. When he asks why she is so scared of him, she tells him about the terrifying rumors she has heard and the fact that he came from an outside world no one has never been to before. After listening to her, he explains how boring and regular he actually is, but she suddenly gets extremely curious and starts asking to know more without realizing that her plot is making little Johnny grow. He manages to stay in control and explains as much as he can before asking why she hasn't been outside the nation if she is so curious about the rest of the world. After she says it's all connected to her parents' sacrifice, he tells her that he only became the Ring King for Hime and would never actually force anyone to get married to him. Once again, Nephrites suddenly gets excited to know more about him, but after he finally reminds her that they are both without plot armor, Jade calls out to her. She then assures him that a simple conversation will help Jade see the truth, but when they step out, he immediately accuses her of trying to betray the promise they made to their parents. She still tries to say that Satohu is a good guy, but Jade goes off the rails and orders her to return to his side, and she does without saying another word. As he then tries to rearrest Satohu, Peridot returns and accepts all the guilt before promising to see to it that Satohu is taken care of. Shortly after that, he and Hime go up to the balcony, and she gets upset because he was having fun with a plot-heady princess while she was worried for his safety. After he teases her for being jealous, Peridot comes out to greet her, and after the introductions, Satohu asks if she knows why Nephrites is so caught up on the promise to her parents. Peridot then takes them back in time to when their nation didn't have the Tempest Wall and held up a tradition of having the princesses marry a fellow elf as a way of making sure the ring never lands in the wrong hands. When it came time for the older sister to Nephrite's mum to get married, she fell in love with a human traveler and had to battle immense hatred from everyone in the village until they made her lover disappear. She then laid a dreadful curse on the nation and left, leaving it in a never-ending state of fear that only stopped when Nephrite's parents decided to make the ultimate sacrifice by creating the Tempest Wall. Before getting turned to stone, they called her to the temple, and her mum made her promise to never set foot outside the nation. As Satohu and the rest of the gang try to figure out a new plan, Nephrites hides away in her room to think, but the memory of her mum's last moment alive brings her to tears. Shortly after that, Alabaster tells Satohu that they have to drop the mission to go look for the other rings, and when Satohu asks if it's right to give up on it, Alabaster reminds him that they don't have time to waste because he is still too weak to take on a Dark Knight. But Satohu still remains upset, so Hime asks if it's about Nephrites. After saying that he feels bad for getting her in trouble, he agrees to leave, so they all start heading out. Jade, who had been quietly watching to see the moment they leave, then tries to convince himself that it was the right thing to do for his people. However, one of the guards suddenly calls out to him before explaining how the Dark Knight ripped a hole through the Tempest Wall to give the monsters a way into the kingdom. By then, Alabaster has already seen the monsters heading to the palace, so he tells Satohu that they have to protect the rings, and he responds by sucking face with Hime for more power. In a matter of minutes, the entire nation descends into chaos, and Peridot hurries over to Nephrite's room to tell her about it, but she still refuses to come out and says Jade will figure something out. While Peridot expresses her disappointment, the Dark Knight finds the temple, but just as he reaches for the ring, Jade shows up and promises to stop him no matter the cost. However, with a single blast, the Dark Knight sends him flying into the wall. Despite this, he still pulls himself back up to face him and gets saved from a second blast by Alabaster. When he asks why they came back, Satohu tells him that he would have been happy to watch the Dark Knight rip him in half, but just wanted to make sure Nephrites doesn't suffer any more than she already has. As he then pulls his sword out to fight, Mars offers to be his backup and reminds him to focus on staying alive. After saying that the makeup session with Hime has tripled his strength level, Satohu attacks, but the knight easily blasts them both away. Jade sees this and says they all don't stand a chance, but Hime tells him that it won't stop Satohu from fighting for her, so he also gets up to do the same for Nephrites. After another failed attempt to attack, Satohu notices that his sword is getting weaker and admits that he underestimated the knight's strength. Upon hearing this, Hime thinks back to their last kiss and realizes that he needs to suck faces with someone else, so she runs to Nephrite's room and starts begging her to act like the princess she is. Back at the temple, Alabaster suggests a retreat, but Satohu refuses and says they have to keep going to protect the rings. Just then, Peridot shows up to tell him about Nephrites and says they have to trust that Hime will convince her before joining the fight. At that moment, Hime tells Nephrites that she understands exactly how painful the responsibility on the rings can be because her parents also lost their lives to protect it, and now she has to watch the person she loves get hurt because of the same rings. Nephrites then tells her about the promise she made to her parents before their sacrifice and says she has to honor them by being a couch potato. However, when Hime tells her that Satohu is fighting because he wants to make sure her home is safe, she starts having second thoughts. The next moment, Hime breaks down and starts pleading with her to help because Satohu will definitely keep fighting even in the face of certain death. Just then, Nephrites finally opens the door, and after she asks if they can really help, they both head to the temple with a massive sledgehammer. After Jade asks why she left her room, she tells him to save the yelling for later. Hime then asks if she is really ready for their next move, and she says yes before running towards her parents with the hammer and smashing them to bits. As Jade freezes in shock, the rings get released and the Tempest Wall falls right before Nephrites runs up to lock lips with Satohu. Hime immediately looks away to avoid feeling jealous, but after Satohu receives the ring, Jade reminds them that an entire army of night monsters have just gained easy access into the kingdom. However, Nephrites tells him not to worry and helps Satohu unleash a powerful blast of light energy that vaporizes every night monster in sight. After it also forces the Dark Knight to a corner, Satohu tries to take a closer look at the rings, but Alabaster tells him to focus on finishing off the Dark Knight. He then charges in, and the Dark Knight immediately tries to blast, But this time Sadahu uses his new wind magic cancel the attack before stabbing into his mask and falling unconscious. Several minutes later, he wakes up and sees Hime with Nephrites, so he tries to ask what happened, but Peridot shows up to commend him on being able to draw out so much power from the rings. The next moment, an elf lady walks in and thanks him for saving all of Ronka, but he gets confused and asks who she is. Alabaster then explains that she is Smara, the firstborn princess that cursed the elf nation after they drove her lover away. Sadahu still remains confused and tries to understand why she suddenly showed up until Peridot reminds him that she was the Dark Knight. She then tosses him a dark version of the Wind Ring and says that it was apparently controlling her mind the entire time. Smara then explains that after leaving the Elf Nation all those years ago, she was filled with so much hatred for the world and started hearing a voice that led her to the ring. When Sadahu asks why they know so little about the Abyss King, Peridot tells him that the first Ring King destroyed his body during their fight and sealed his soul in a land far away. After Alabaster says that the recent rise in dark monster attacks shows that the Abyss King is regaining his strength, Sadahu decides that they have to start looking for the next ring, but he suddenly gets dizzy, so Hime holds him up while Peridot says that any normal king would be dead if they used half of the power he just unleashed. This makes him realize that it's all thanks to the girls, but when he tries to tell Nephrites that his heart belongs to Hime, she offers to help him feel even better in the royal bath. Minutes later, the three of them enter the bath, and Nephrites claims she is well aware of how much they love each other. When she asks Hime for tips on how to be a good wife, Hime starts acting weird and boasts about doing absolutely everything couples do to make herself look better. After she claims that they clap multiple times every night, Peridot shows up with her massive jugs of chocolate milk and says she wants to see a live performance. She further explains that living extremely long has given her enough time to learn everything there is to learn about how every creature in their world does it. As she continues telling them to get down to business, Hime decides to back up her words and proceeds to push him down for a kiss. However, after he suddenly pushes her back and says he doesn't want to be pressured into it, Peridot gets shocked by the size of little Johnny. Up on the balcony at the time, Smara has just asked Alabaster if he knows anything about the traveler she fell in love with. When he pulls out a locket, she asks how he got it and says she gave it to her lover back then, so he claims to have known him for a while. He goes on to tell her that her lover left so she could have a happy life without the stress of her people's rejection weighing down on her. Later on, Nephrites goes back to the temple to pay her respects and thanks her parents for the sacrifice they made. When Jade shows up and asks if she is leaving with Sadahu, she says yes, and he surprisingly stops himself from having another mental breakdown. Several minutes after that, she joins Sadahu and the others and expresses how happy she is to finally see the rest of the world before reminding him of a promise he made to take her to his world as well. Back at Peridot's place, Smara apologizes for not properly addressing her as one of the original princesses from the time of the first Ring King, and Peridot reminds her that none of the ring princesses from their nation had happy endings before saying that Sadahu's unusual personality might actually change things. Just then, Smara hears two guards talking about how they wanted a moment of Alabaster's time and recognizes the name because he is actually the same lover from all those years ago. A couple nights later, Hime dreams of welcoming Sadahu back home and offering to clean his pipe after a hard day at work. However, after getting thrown into the bed, Nephrite swaps places with her, and she ends up watching the whole thing before waking up in the woods. She then goes to check on everyone and sees Sadahu giving Nephrites all of his attention. Moments later, Mars asks for which ring nation they are heading to next, so Alabaster tells him about the dragon folk living in the Water Nation. While they continue discussing it, Hime keeps watching Sadahu and realizes that he has only been spending time with Nephrites since they left her nation. When she asks for a plate to see if he will remember that she exists, he tells her to go get it herself and she finally loses it. However, the shocked look on their faces causes her to feel embarrassed, so she tries to run away, but Sadahu stops her. Just then, they see an entire nation on wheels, and while they all freeze in shock, Alabaster gets excited and says that they are looking at the Fire Nation. When he says that they have to forget about the Water Ring for now and focus on meeting the Fire Nation's princess, Marsh's mood suddenly changes, and Sadahu starts to wonder if he wanted to see someone over there. After Sadahu asks if there is a way inside, Alabaster calls out for help, and someone drops a ladder from the very top. Upon seeing how high they have to climb, Nephrites tells Sadahu that it has been fun because she would rather go back to Jade than risk her life. Just as Sadahu tries to say that he will help her up, Hime suddenly grabs her and tells him not to worry about it. Moments later, she manages to get Nephrites to climb to the top while Sadahu follows behind her and takes a moment to enjoy the view of her vanilla buns. Right before getting off the ladder, she notices and almost throws him. so Marsh and Alabaster explain how gravity works in case she is too stupid to realize the danger she just put him in. When Nephrites takes a look inside and sees that the nation is just one big market, she activates nerd mode after commending her on being so knowledgeable about the cat people's history. Alabaster suggests asking around for their princess before noticing that Hime and Nephrites have disappeared. Minutes later, Nephrites finds an interesting spot to talk about and tries to explain it to Satohu before realizing that she has been holding Hime's hand this entire time. When Hime says they might be lost, she nearly loses bladder control, but after freaking out, she throws up everything Satohu fed her from breakfast. Just then, Hime spots some of the cat people and says they actually just look like cute models wearing a costume, but Nephrites suddenly goes AWL and says there's nothing cute about the strength and skill they possess. Just then, one of the cat girls asks if they need help, and when they explain how they got separated from the boys, she tells them to head to the arena because everyone ends up going there eventually. After they both thank her, Nephrites admits that she might have overestimated their personalities a little. Meanwhile, Sado continues freaking out over losing them until Alabaster tells him to relax before also saying they need to get to the arena. On the way there, he notices two cat girls intensely staring in their direction and asks Marsh if he needs to be worried. Marsh then says it shouldn't be a problem, as the cat people value strength over everything else, and this causes our dust-brained protagonist to think they can sense the hero aura leaking out of his body. When the girls start thirsting over Marsh instead, every shred of confidence left in him shatters, and Marsh even tries to tell them that he is the actual hero. Marsh then asks if they know where to find the princess, and they both get disappointed before agreeing to help since they are clearly trying to court her like everyone else. Meanwhile, the girls decide to take a snack break, and when Hime notices a smudge on Nephrite's face and cleans it off, she claims to love how similar she is to Satohu. She further explains how she now sees them as her new parents. But that creeps Hime out, so she reminds her that she is technically at least 3 decades older than the both of them. When Nephrite suddenly starts apologizing for taking all of Satohu's time, Hime acts like she has no problem with it until she says her jealousy was not difficult to notice. After Hime admits that she has been feeling a little jealous, Nephrite tells her to take it as proof that she really loves Satohu and says she still only admires him and worries if she will be able to fulfill her duty as a ring princess to him. Just then, a man gets tossed out of the arena with half his teeth missing. And Satohu finally shows up with Marsh and Alabaster, so Hime runs over to warn him against entering inside. However, when the cat girls say that it is the stage where guys court the princess, they decide to go inside and watch as she treats a fully grown knight like a punching bag. After crushing every bone in his body, Granite takes one look at Satohu's rings and realizes who he is but says she will only marry a man stronger than her. All of a sudden, she charges toward him, so Alabaster tells him to get his guard up, and he manages to dodge the first strike before getting his gut smashed by her sword's handle. Granite then asks how a ring king can be so powerless and tells him to come back after a couple days so she can focus on the real men trying to win her love. Hours later, Satohu starts training with Marsh, but easily gets knocked down while Hime watches and low-key starts to regret not choosing Marsh in the first place. Just then, a cat man tells him food is ready, so they join everyone else at the dinner table and listen as the cat man explains that Granite started seeking out strong suitors after defeating every man in the nation. After he says she is the strongest cat person of their generation, Alabaster admits that it would be impossible for Satohu to defeat her with his pathetic sword skills. He then asks for the point of all the training with Marcia, but Alabaster tells him to focus on learning how to fight her with his rings. When he says that using them could give him an unfair advantage, the cat man tells him not to worry because a bunch of the suitors Granite defeated were all powerful magicians and mages. After eating as much as he can for extra strength, Satohu goes back to the arena to get an idea of Granite's fighting style, but she quickly defeats her suitor in a matter of seconds. Moments later, Hime finds him sitting by himself, and after he says Alabaster will be out soon to give him magic lessons, she makes him lie on her thighs as a reward for all the hard work he has been putting in. Just then, Nephrix comes out but decides to hide and listen as Hime tells Satohu that he doesn't have to push himself so hard. When he asks if she would still like to be married to a weakling, she tells him that the powers he will gain from the rings will be enough and claims that she likes him being a little nerdy. However, when Alabaster finally shows up for the training, he promises to do his best and leaves. Later that day, he tries to find the sauna room but ends up in a steamy massage parlor filled with the hottest cat women he has ever seen. After Mars also shows up, they get seated to have a light chat, and Satohu asks how he is so skilled with the sword. When Marsa asks why he seems so surprised by it, Sadahu says he usually acts like he hates any sort of violence, so Marsa admits that he likes to avoid unnecessary fights, but further explains how being born as a royal in the Empire meant he had no choice but to become strong. Just then, a hot masseuse asks if they want to get a massage, and after Sadahu says yes, a brown Hulk grabs him and promises to make sure he never forgets the experience. Minutes later, the traumatic session ends, and Sadahu starts praying for amnesia right before Granite shows up for a massage and tells him to do it. The next moment, she rips off the towel and climbs the table, but he tells her that he has never given anyone a massage before. She then tells him that being a pathetic weakling who couldn't last 2 seconds in the arena means he has to obey one command from her. He agrees to it, but a couple seconds into the massage, she starts talking about the rings and says she is willing to put on a fake match to make everyone believe he defeated her so they can get married. After saying that she is only doing it because she understands how important the rings are, she gets up to leave. But he turns down the offer and promises to defeat her with his strength. The next morning, Sadahu wakes up for another day of training, but to replenish his energy if he locks lips with her for a steamy makeout session. When he ignores the obvious invitation to clap and says he is not so sure he can defeat Granite, she tells him to just use training. Hours later, Sadahu finally manages to get the drop on Marsa and asks if he is finally good enough to take on Granite. But Marsa reminds him that she is a powerful warrior who will definitely come at him with complicated techniques that he hasn't seen before. After giving a slight demonstration of how easy it is to get hit by a confusing sword technique, Marsa tells him to just use the ring's magic because he is still too weak to land a single hit in an actual fight. Sadahu then asks for one. Moments later, she jumps into bed and regrets that she went that far when it was only a massage, but then she starts thinking of how he probably handled Granite's hot bod and fantasizes about getting the freaky version of that massage from him. The Hemed then replies that Sadahu doesn't need to be fighting for anyone's approval because her marriage to Granite will only be a formality to get the power of her ring. Meanwhile, the knight who just lost to her starts feeling a little jealous that Sadahu has access to such incredible power simply because of the rings. The next moment, he hears a voice promising to give him the strength he has been searching for before seeing a dark ring on the floor. As it then takes over his mind, Sadahu prepares himself for Granite's attack, but she stops to ask if he is really sure about fighting her without his rings. Just as he promises to make sure she acknowledges his strength, the knight returns and knocks out the guards before telling Sadahu that he will not be as lucky as he was back in Ramka. The moment he charges in, Granite jumps in to defend him, but she only takes off the knight's helmet, so he covers himself in flames and opens a portal above the arena to summon beasts from the abyss. As the dragons prepare to turn the locals into a KFC special, Alabaster tries to use his magic against them. However, a bunch of cat girls run in and somehow manage to take off their heads in an instant. One of them then explains that they have been training ever since the August King was first defeated. Granite orders the other girls to evacuate all the civilians and separate the district from the rest of the nation so the monsters won't spread. After telling 3 others to focus on the last dragon in the arena, Granite calls for her sword and thanks the knight for finally giving her a worthy fight. Her that she also almost got murked. She tells him that her people were trained to support the Ring King, which gives her no choice but to fight till the end. She also points out the fact that he is even weaker than when they first met, but that strikes a chord, so he admits that he might never reach her level of strength before saying that he is still willing to try anything to help take the knight down. He then comes up with a plan to use the rings to draw the knight in close, and she agrees to help out despite how dangerous it is. After getting some space, he proceeds to flash the rings to the knight, who then charges in to collect them. Once he gets close enough, Sadahu unleashes the Wind Ring's abilities again, but this time, he manages to turn off the knight's flames. The next moment, Granite charges in and strikes his sword away before tossing hers to Sadahu for the final strike. He then charges up the sword with the Ring of Light before shattering the dark mask and freeing the knight from the ring's control. As one of the cat girls returns to tell Granite how easy it was to defeat the abyss monsters, Sadahu looks over at Hemed to make sure she is okay. Granite then admits that she might have underestimated him and says she is finally ready to become his wife, causing Hemed to get sad. However, Sadahu rejects her offer and says he would rather make her his wife by defeating her than accept to get married simply because she is showing mercy. After challenging her to a final duel, they both get into position and she charges in as usual, but this time he manages to track her movement. However, she ends up being a little too fast and almost shatters his wife. Nephrates then asks why she isn't cheering for him and says he is actually fighting for her sake. Just then, Granite realizes that he doesn't plan to use the rings, so she asks if he is underestimating her abilities. Sadhu then tells her that the power he gets from the rings does not belong to him, and even if he used them to win, it would mean that he has accepted being a weakling in front of the woman he loves. Upon hearing this, Hime's heart starts beating even harder for him, so she promises to let him hit if he defeats her. While everyone else gets shocked and thinks Hime accidentally took catnip, Sadhu enters the zone but suddenly hears a voice in his head before realizing that it's coming from the ring. After it offers to help him predict her moves, he tries to refuse, but it assures him that the assist has nothing to do with the power he gains from Hime and Nephrites. The next moment, Granite charges in like before, but after she suddenly vanishes, the ring tells him to look up, and he uses all the training with Mars to defeat her. He then tries to figure out what was behind the ring's voice, but Granite jumps in to kiss him and acknowledges his strength before asking for his magnum. She then explains that it's the natural order for a man and his wife to get down to business as soon as possible, but when she tries to order her subordinates to make arrangements, he tells her to stop, so she asks if her perfect jugs are not good enough for him. He replies that it has nothing to do with her chocolate milk before saying that he already has a special appointment with Hime. Several minutes later, she prepares herself and waits for him to sit before saying that she is ready for whatever he wants. After grabbing her hand and saying that he can't wait any longer, he pushes her into the bed and falls into a deep sleep. By sunrise, Nephrites crawls out and tells him that his V-card is still intact before asking for her turn with him. Granite also shows up to join the party, but one of her subordinates tells her that they are done with the banquet preparations. They then go on to spend the rest of the day feasting. And at one point, Granite reminds Sadhu of his promise to make her submit to him. This causes him to remember the mysterious voice that helped him, and she also admits to being surprised by his sudden ability to read every move, but she still accepts his victory as Hime throws back a full cup of wine and immediately passes out. So he carries her back to the room and asks why she would suddenly go that far, when she suddenly grabs his shirt and asks for proof that she is still the most important in his heart. He grabs her by the shoulder and says he has decided to wait until they return to the normal world. Instead of asking if he is just too scared to pull it out, she agrees to it, but says she still wants to reward him by granting one wish. He then asks to play with her melons, but after she gives him permission to grab them, they see Nephrites and Granite secretly watching. Granite then pounces on him and says she is tired of waiting for him to act like a man, but after Hime and Nephrites realize that she overdosed on catnip, they knock her out with a stool to preserve his purity. Days later, they all arrive on shores of Masa, the water nation inhabited by dragonfolk, and after admiring how large it is, Sadhu notices that Mars is no longer with them. Alabaster then says he went ahead to attend to personal matters, and this causes Sadhu to remember how eager he was to reach the nation. The moment they start heading inside, a girl clad in a ceremonial outfit shows up to greet Sadhu and claims to be his biggest fan before giving him flowers. The excessive glazing starts filling up his usually empty head, but then the chick suddenly kisses him and unleashes a power that they all realize is the water ring after she pulls away from him. After laughing at how easy it was to catch him off guard, Sappho introduces herself as the nation's princess. When Sadhu asks Alabaster if what she just did is allowed, Alabaster tells him to be happy that he didn't have to do any work before thanking Sappho for her quick cooperation. She then takes one look at the girls and tells them to do as they please before telling Sato that he must now fulfill his responsibility to her nation and save it from certain doom. Upon hearing this, he starts to realize that her easy cooperation is connected to something else. But then a general named Sluder shows up with a bunch of Imperial guards to ask why she suddenly left the palace. After she grabs Sadhu's arm and says she has fulfilled her duty as Maiden of the Ring by handing it over to him, Sluder invites them all to the palace for a proper meeting. In a carriage moments later, Sadhu struggles to believe his eyes when he sees a giant waterfall towering above the nation, and while Alabaster explains its importance to him, Nephrites retreats to the safety of her blanket. Just then, Sappho shows them a bunch of Imperial soldiers and explains how they have completely taken over from Masa's troops in what she believes to be a very precise plan to take over their nation and make it the newest member of the Empire. As Sadhu's interest peaks, Alabaster reminds him that the Empire is Marsh's country, and Golder is actually his older brother who has single-handedly expanded the Empire's reach into practically every nation besides those with rings. When Sadhu asks if the Empire is evil, Sappho asks if he is one of those slow numbskulls that need to have everything explained to them. Minutes later, they finally get to the palace, but a sudden loud roar suddenly spreads a wave of fear across the nation. After Sappho says something about a certain woman's prediction coming to pass, Granite tells him to dodge right before a squid-like monster blasts its way in through the ground. The girls immediately try to help Sadahu, but he quickly activates the Ring of Fire to weaken the beast before slicing it in half. Moments after the usual glazing, Saphir takes him into the throne room for a formal introduction to her father the king and tells a cloaked lady called the Oracle that her plan to stop Sadahu from getting the rings by having her locked in the palace failed. The Oracle lady then claims to have no idea what she is talking about and whispers something into the king's ear to make him believe that she also predicted Saphir's rebellion. After he starts blaming Sadahu for the great suffering about to befall Masa, the Oracle carries him inside, and Sadahu asks Saphir if the goth addict is her mom. She immediately denies having anything to do with her and says she is still trying to understand why her once immensely wise father suddenly started acting like he got stage 4 dementia. Shortly after that, Marcia joins them to head inside the palace, but then a second princess shows up and asks Saphir how she could take such an important step without talking to her about it. When they all get confused by how similar they look, Saphir explains that Saphira is actually her twin sister, but then Saphira takes one look at Sadahu before asking Saphir how she could marry such an ugly definition of average. The girls then take turns trying to defend Sadahu until Mars suddenly calls out to Saphira and swears that he has not forgotten the promise he made to her. After she runs off, Saphir says that she isn't surprised by the fact that he still hasn't found his balls yet, but he ignores her to chase after Saphira. Sadahu then asks if they have some kind of relationship, and once again, Saphir realizes that she has to explain the obvious to Senior Clueless, so she decides to give them a crash course from the very beginning. Years ago, the Empire tried to take Masa by force, but after a humiliating defeat, they left and sent Mars to infiltrate Masa under the guise of a charming prince, seeking nothing but a united world. As Marcia began to focus more on uniting his glizzy with Saphira's divine chamber, Saphir could tell that there was more to his love, but also knew it was real. However, things took a turn when Mars had to return to the Empire to provide intel they could use to finally take Masa. He still had to leave Masa, but promised Saphira that he would return to marry her no matter the cost. Months after that, he sent her a letter saying that he was going to become the Ring King, which meant he could finally come and get her, even if he would have to clap other princesses along the way, and Saphira was looking forward to it until Mars failed to keep his promise by letting Sadahu take his place. Shortly after that, the Oracle showed up and used her prediction to gain the king's trust before slowly increasing the Empire's hold over Masa. Several hours later, the Oracle summons a group of assassins and orders them to get the rings from Sadahu after sending him to the afterlife. Upon getting to his window, they see that he is in plot heaven and wonder why life is so unfair to NPCs before one of them says there should be a thick Catwoman there as well. Just then, Granite knocks them both out and gets surprised when she sees that they are human, but then one of them drops a smoke bomb so they can escape. On the way out the next day, she tells everyone, and while Sadahu says he never even knew assassins were a real thing, one of them returns for a second attempt with an arrow. However, Alabaster stops it and makes sure the assassin knows that his entire existence has amounted to pathetic failure. Several minutes later, Nephrites and Hime get changed and start playing around in the water, while Sadahu hangs back with Granite and asks why she isn't swimming. After saying that she is already wet, she asks if he is finally ready to handle a real woman, but Hime immediately runs out of the water to remind them that she gets to clap him first. Just then, Saphir shows up with the tiniest plot armor she could find, and they all get shocked because people with melon seeds on their chest are not usually excited to put their ribs on display. Moments later, she reminds Sadahu to stay on the lookout for another assassin attempt because there's no way the Oracle will give up on getting the rings. He then goes to find Marcia and asks for the real reason why he didn't fight to become the Ring King. After telling him that he just couldn't handle the burden, Marcia explains that the look in Hime's eyes when she first returned made him realize that she was also in a similar situation with what he had going on with Saphira. Later that evening, he meets up with Sluder and pleads with him to pull away from Masa, but Sluder claims that everything happening is according to their father's will. He then tells Mars to continue giving them information on Sadahu because that is the only way he will regain their father's trust after failing to become the Ring King himself. After their talk, Mars tries to head back inside, but then the Oracle ambushes him and tells him that an army of monsters will attack Masa in 3 days' time. She then says he has to assassinate Sadahu and steal the rings by using the monster invasion as a distraction when that day comes. He immediately tries to refuse, but she says he has no choice because it is the Emperor's order. When she tells him that taking Sadahu's life will fix the relationship he ruined with his father, Mars asks if she works for the Empire, but she tells him not to worry about that before offering him a sword capable of holding out against Satohu's rings. Mars quickly senses the power sealed in it and asks how she has such a weapon, but she claims it is all connected to her ability to predict stuff before telling him to make sure he succeeds. By sunrise, Mars remains plagued by the decision he has to make, but then he remembers the day his father called him to the throne room to tell him how practically the entire nation was calling him a failure because he chose to spend his time rising up the enemy. Mars was able to stomach the disappointed look, but then his father told him not to fail at becoming the Ring King as well because that would make him an utterly worthless child that should have never been born. As the memory of that slowly increases the hatred in his heart, he sees Saphira trying to have her morning bath and tries to say hi, but upon seeing him, she takes off running. This causes him to completely fall into despair and gives the dark energy and the sword enough power to take over his mind. 3 days later, they all meet in the throne room to listen to Sluder's plan to defeat the army of monsters, and when Satohu offers to help the fight, Sluder tells him that people with his level of power are meant to wait until everything else fails. He then takes a look at the Oracle and senses something off about her before telling Satohu to focus on keeping the palace safe. After they all leave the palace, Hime stops Satohu to recharge his hero batteries with a kiss and says she just wants to make sure he has enough strength for when the time comes. After Granite and Nephrites also kiss him and start arguing about who is the better wife with Hime, Saphir fights back the urge to puke and asks if she is the only one seeing how incredibly average and weird Satohu is. At the time, Sluder's men have already started fighting off the army of monsters, and one of his subordinates admits that it's almost suspicious how accurate the attack is with the Oracle's prediction. Just then, another one of his subordinates shows up and suggests sending a unit back to the palace because one of the monsters snuck past them and is currently heading there. Despite this, Sluder tells him to maintain the formation and claims one monster won't be a problem if it's heading to the palace. As they continue the fight, Satohu and Alabaster see the monster squid at the top of the waterfall, so they make all the girls run inside before preparing to fight it off. However, Marsa suddenly charges in to attack Satohu. So Alabaster decides to take on the monster and tells him to focus on Marsa. While barely managing to dodge most of his attacks, Satohu asks why he is doing this, so Marsa says that it's finally time for him to take what he wants before increasing the force of his attacks. The next moment, Alabaster realizes that he is being controlled, so he tells Satohu to use the rings. However, after Mars cuts through his attack, the rings start talking again and claim to know the power behind the sword. When it tells him to combine all of its power to completely obliterate Mars, Satohu refuses, so it warns him that Mars isn't going to be that merciful. This causes Satohu to remember that Mars is a lot better than him at fighting with a sword. As the expression on Mars's face confirms his suspicions, the girls hear about their fight, so they all run out to the balcony to watch. Just then, Mars charges in again, but this time, Satohu allows him to sink the blade into his arm and claims to know that he is holding back because he could have easily sliced him in half if he actually wanted to. Mars then drops to his knees and asks to be taken out for good because he has become the worthless failure his dad always said he was. When Satohu instead asks him to officially become a member of his party and prove his worth to himself, Mars' daddy issues suddenly gets cured, and the rings immediately direct Satohu to shatter the gem controlling his mind. The next moment, Alabaster tells them to watch out because he can't hold off the beast any longer. After breaking free, it tries to attack Hime, but Granite cuts off its tentacle, so it grabs Saphira instead. The Oracle then reveals herself and tells Marsa that his failure wasn't really a surprise before saying that they have to trade the rings for Saphira. Instead of trying to negotiate with her, Marsh starts talking about how he wants to finally take charge of his life and determine his worth through his own actions. To demonstrate how serious he is, he gets as close as possible and asks Saphira to marry him, causing the Oracle to ask if he has actually lost it. However, Satohu uses it as a distraction to free Saphira, but the Oracle suddenly goes off the rails and reveals her real form as a dark knight before transforming the monster squid into an abomination. They all start to fear that this might be too much for Satohu, but then Saphir says she has finally seen why he makes a good Ring King before kissing him on the cheek. With both their powers amplified, she transforms into a colossal dragon and swallows the abomination in one bite, giving the Oracle no choice but to escape through a portal. After Saphir returns to her normal caked-up form, they all go to see her dad, who has now become the Pro-Max version of One Punch Man. He first thanks Satohu for all his help and promises to support him whenever he needs it before also offering his thanks to Sluder and Marsa. He goes on to say that Masa will now be protecting itself, but promises to maintain a good relationship with the Empire. He then apologizes to Sapphire for putting her through a lot, but when he commends her on finding a good husband in Satohu, she tells him that there is nothing good about the slow-brained virgin. The next moment, Mars asks for permission to make Sapphire his wife, and after expressing how happy he is to see that she has also found happiness, he gives them his blessings. Satohu then overhears Hime wishing that she could have also experienced such a proposal. However, when Mars suddenly says that the both of them are next, they get confused because they were the first to get married. After they both realize that he is talking about bedroom activity, Sluder starts heading out but stops to tell Mars that he has to figure out how the Empire is connected to the Oracle Lady and monster attacks. Meanwhile, she has just told their father about everything and claims that Masa shouldn't have received any of his attention. When she suddenly gets close and promises to help him take over the world with her special powers, he slices right through her midsection and says that he will no longer depend on her darkness before finishing her off. Back in Masa that night, the girls all start an argument over which of them gets to sleep closest to Satohu, and it eventually gets to the point where Sapphire gives up and decides to go back to her room. Satohu then tries to use the cut Mars gave him as an excuse to keep them all in bed, but Hime tells him to shut the hell up and continues arguing with the others. When he suddenly decides to end the fight by reminding them that Hime will always be his number one, they all claim to not care as long as he can help them climax occasionally. Just then, Granite suddenly pounces on him, and he suddenly starts seeing them without plot covers before having a full conversation with the voice in the ring about the best way to clap them all in one go. By the time Hime interrupts and threatens to rip little Johnny to shreds, he wakes up and realizes that it was all a dream. However, he still feels bad that Hime always has to fight the other girls off, so he wakes her up and asks if they can go out together. Nephrites gets excited and asks if he wants to leave now. Upon realizing that she thinks it's a harem date, he explains that he will only be spending time with Hime. Minutes later, Hime gives herself a scrub down with one of Sapphire's soaps, and its romantic scent causes her to drift off into a daydream where Satohu gives her a special body wash with his magic wand. Meanwhile, Alabaster receives the shock of his life when Satohu asks him for money to take Hime out. However, after telling him to make sure they spend the night folding each other like pretzels, he hands him a fat bag of cash and reminds him that this isn't Japan, so he can drop the good boy act. Later that morning, the lovebirds head out for their date, but Granite, Nephrites, and Sapphire follow closely behind them to see if they will actually have enough balls to take things to the next step. After hours of trying out all the basic stops, they reach a park, and Sapphire says something about it being the best spot for lovers before Satohu and Hime see a bunch of couples sucking faces. Despite this, they still find a spot to sit, and upon seeing the eager look in Hime's eyes, Satohu realizes that she wants it, so he tries to lean in for the kiss. To nobody's surprise, he suddenly pulls away and starts making excuses about being in public, but Hime tells him not to worry before asking if he is just too shy to start it. The next moment, Granite and the girls start heading out and agree that Satohu is still too much of a wimp to actually do anything. When Sapphire starts complaining about how boring the day was, Nephrites claims to be happy that she at least got to hang out with friends. After a couple of more hours of enjoying ice cream out in a field, the lovebirds also head back, and when Hime asks if their day counts as a date, Satohu says it was his intention before asking if she didn't see it that way. She then asks why he suddenly wanted to take her out, so he explains how he has always wanted to have amazing experiences with her, but couldn't because of the whole saving the world thing. When she suddenly tells him to make it the last time he takes her out for such a romantic date, he gets confused and asks if he did something wrong. She then claims to have accepted that he will never just belong to her because he can't keep avoiding his responsibility to the others. She further reminds him that it is his duty as their hero to keep the girls satisfied, but then he suddenly pins her to the wall and demonstrates his commitment with a steamy kiss. The moment he pulls away and sees that she obviously wants something else, he remembers what Alabaster told him and realizes that it's the perfect opportunity to finally taste the forbidden fruit. However, Hime ends up being the one to chicken out this time, so they still end up disappointing cultured freaks like you and head home. The next morning, Sapphire gets upset when Alabaster says she has to follow them to get the next ring, so Granite calls her a spineless coward who is just too scared to leave home. She then steps outside with Sapphire to talk about it, and after making sure that she will be okay on her own, Sapphire agrees to go. In the carriage several hours later, Alabaster concludes the history lesson on the kingdom for dwarves which they are currently heading to, and Satohu starts asking if he now has to clap a chick the same size as a garden gnome. When Sapphire says there might not even be a princess to begin with, they all get confused, so she explains that during the first war against the Abyss King, The dwarves, who were already small in numbers, almost got completely wiped out. She further explains that the one who survived decided to isolate themselves in a mountain village and could have possibly died out in the years that followed. Exactly 3 days later, Sadahu gets tired of listening to Alabaster and asks if he actually knows where they are going. After assuring him that they will be at the Earth Nation soon, he tells them to avoid the edges so they don't trip and get stuck in a graveyard filled with monster bones. While Nephrite completely ignores his warnings to look at the bones, Sadahu asks Saphir if she can use her dragon form again just in case they run into something dangerous. After she makes up an excuse about always feeling pain whenever she uses it, Marcia tells Alabaster that he just found a good spot to set up camp, so the old geezer decides to put their expedition on hold and rest for the night. Hours later, Sadahu asks him if the rings are really as valuable as he always claims. This question surprises Alabaster. Alabaster then explains that a lot of nations have just learned to defend themselves instead of clinging onto some legend. When Sadahu says that the Empire might actually become strong enough to challenge the Abyss King without the power of the rings, Alabaster reminds him of all the dangerous monsters they have had to fight and explains that they are only a fraction of the Abyss King's abilities. He then tells Sadahu not to worry because the power of his rings combined with that of the Empire will be more than enough to keep them safe. But after Sadahu heads inside to rest, Alabaster begins to question his own beliefs. By noon the next day, they finally locate the Earth Nation but quickly realize that the legends of its destruction were all true. As they all make their way inside to take a look around, Saphir decides to take a much-needed break and tells them to come find her if they locate the ring. So Granite offers to carry her around for the rest of the journey. As she suddenly turns red and starts arguing with Granite, Hime starts to feel like they are being followed, but after minutes of looking over her shoulder, she accepts that it might just be the weeds. Moments later, they find the throne and get surprised at how well preserved it is before Sadahu sees what looks like a fresh corpse and asks Alabaster why it looks even larger than the average human. After telling him to relax, Alabaster explains that the dwarves were good at building mechanical suits that only worked when powered by magic. Granite also tells him that the dwarves were the ones behind the mechanisms of her mobile nation before Alabaster suggests going even deeper into the nation to see if they might get better leads. Just then, the suit starts walking towards them while promising to get revenge for its nation, so Sadahu knocks it down and asks Alabaster if a zombie robot is usual in their world. When it gets back up, they all see the dark ring on its finger and realize that it has become a dark night, but it suddenly creates a wall around Sadahu to trap him. After charging in, the August King tells Sadahu to stop fighting for a world that has nothing to do with him, but after he refuses, Alabaster blasts a hole through the wall and Hime locks lips to give him strength. With that, he charges up the sword with the Ring of Light and cuts the suit down. However, the dark ring suddenly evaporates, followed by all the other ones they had encountered, as the August King finally regains his power. The next moment, a portal opens up above them, and 2 demon wolves fall through, so they run outside only to see that an entire army of monsters has already been summoned. Sadahu then tells Saphir to go dragon mode, but she refuses and says she can't use her abilities without being close to water. After several minutes of fighting, Sadahu and the girls start to lose energy, so Alabaster unleashes a blinding light to distract the monsters long enough for them to escape. Using his control over the earth, he blocks their path and notices that Sadahu has already used up all his energy before his heart suddenly sinks as he looks up and sees a low-budget adaptation of the rumbling. As they all see the hundreds of colossal beasts marching towards them, Sadahu senses the Abyss King's hunger for death and starts asking Alabaster for their next move. After saying that there is nothing he can do without all 5 rings, Alabaster opens up a portal to the regular world and tells Sadahu that he has to keep Hime and the girls safe. Just then, one of the monsters makes it past the wall, so Marcia cuts it down and decides to stay back and fight with Alabaster. By sunrise the next day, Sadahu wakes up and thinks back on how Hime broke down after they made it through the portal. Meanwhile, Hime ends up schooling the others on how to use plot armor until he comes in to check on them and realizes that his life just entered a different level of complicated. A couple of hours later, they all go shopping at the nearest mall, and after selecting good outfits, Sadahu tells Hime that they will still attract attention with their demi-human features. However, Hime claims that they can pass as cosplay addicts, so he decides to just focus on the fact that she doesn't seem as upset as when they first came through the portal. Shortly after that, they all head to a nearby restaurant for food, but while the rest of them discuss ways they could possibly return, Nephrite gets distracted by all the bright colors and technology until the waiter gives her a heart attack. After she takes their order, Granite starts to accept that they might be stuck without a way back, but Saphir asks how she can easily give up on returning to her nation. After she says that they will definitely be safe without her for some time, Nephrite admits to being worried about her brother in Peridot. While she explains her newfound addiction to sweets, Satohu starts to worry about his almost empty wallet, but Hime tells him not to worry about the money. Sapphire then suggests searching for magic pack spots that they use to connect to their world, but after an entire day of failing to find anything meaningful, she also accepts their new reality while soaking up in the bath. When Granite suddenly says that her new mission is to bring her species to Earth by clapping every otaku that walks, Nephrite tells her to relax before saying that she will try being an extrovert for once. Granite then reminds Hime that she and Satohu promised to visit Pound Town when they return, but she completely avoids the subject. Minutes later, she wishes them good night before heading over to Satohu's place to spend the night, but instead of finally giving her diabolical backshots, Satohu decides to discuss finances. After telling him not to worry again, she explains how she found a letter from Alabaster in her room and realized that he had already planned for a situation like this before they first went back. The following day, both of them return to school like nothing happened and make up random stories about how they spent the holiday. As the days go on, Nephrite starts visiting the library to learn more about Earth, while Granite gets close to the local cats. Sapphire, however, spends all her time cooped up inside trying to think of a solution to get them back home. One particular night, Hime finds Satohu at the same spot the portal brought them through and says she knows he has been sneaking out at night to see if he can find a way back. After he admits to it and says he can't stop thinking about everyone they left behind, she starts begging him to forget about her world and focus on being happy with her and his. Just as he holds her back, they get blinded by a bright light from inside the shrine and see a mysterious girl. After getting on her feet, she takes one look at him and says she has finally found the Ring King, but upon seeing how close Hime is, she apologizes for interrupting and turns to leave. They then stop her and ask who she is, so she introduces herself as Amber, the Princess of Dwarves. This only increases their confusion, so she explains that just before their species completely went extinct, the dwarves created a mechanical replica of their princess and sealed her away in a special contraption made to keep her alive until the right time. After expressing how happy she is to finally fulfill her destiny, Amber tries to kiss him, but Hime stops her and says there is no point because they have already lost to the Abyss King. Upon hearing this, Amber agrees to leave but says she will wait until he changes his mind. Shortly after that, they join the others for dinner, and Granite starts complaining about all the time Satohu spends outside before Nephrite tells them how she had to stop going to the library because she was making everyone uncomfortable. When Sapphire suddenly asks where they are coming from, Satohu tries to tell them about Amber, but Hime stops him and says they were at a store. Back at his place moments later, she tells him to keep it a secret before saying that there is no way he can defeat the Abyss King even if he collects Amber's ring. On the way to school the next day, she runs off to meet her friends, and Amber suddenly walks out of the bushes to tell Satohu that she was disappointed when he chose to abandon his destiny for a little bit of happiness that he knows won't last long. Later that day, he goes back to the shrine to see her, and she suddenly reveals that she can take them back to Hime's world, but he has to accept her as the final wife and receive her power first. After classes the following day, she meets him on the roof and asks why he is alone, so he tells her that Hime already went back home. He then says that she was right about focusing on the life they currently have because the 5 rings might not be able to stop the Abyss King, but Amber assures him that it will definitely bring them victory. When he asks why she is so dedicated to giving him the ring, she reminds him that it is her destiny to help him save the world and says the others definitely feel the same even if they are too scared to admit it. This causes him to realize that the princesses will never be able to settle into an average life of eating Doritos and arguing about equal rights, so he decides to get married to her. After she locks lips with him to exchange her powers, he heads back home, and Hime suddenly jumps into his arms and spends a couple of minutes crying before saying that she was just missing Alabaster. The next moment, she sees the 5th ring and gets heartbroken as she realizes that he had made up his mind. He then tries to convince her that it's the right thing to do, but she continues crying and says he might actually lose his life this time until he reminds her of all the time she saved him by being at his side. He goes to say that there is no way he can lose as long as his heart beats for her, and for some reason this convinces her that the power of love can save him from an army of demon titans. After he wipes her tears, she reminds him of their promise and says she is finally ready to have her cake filled up by his magnum. However, just as he is about to handle business, Amber shows up to tell him that the portal is ready. Upon seeing Hime's plot covers scattered across the room, she apologizes for intruding but says they only have one shot, so they both start getting dressed. The next moment, Granite runs in with Sapphire and Nephrite before saying that she overheard their conversation about Amber the other night. After telling Hime that she completely understands why she was scared to go back, They all promise to give Sadahu their love and support before jumping through the portal. Upon returning to the Earth Nation, Amber runs a quick scan and says she senses no living creature nearby, but Granite suddenly tells them to get back because she can smell blood. Amber then activates the floodlights in her chest for a better view, and they all get horrified upon seeing endless bodies of monsters and Imperial soldiers littering the mountainside. As they all start to fear that their world might already be fully conquered, Granite hears shouting in the distance, so they run to the edge and see Imperial soldiers still standing their ground against the monsters. All of a sudden, all 5 rings light up, and Sadahu quickly realizes that they are reacting to the presence of the Abyss King. After seeing how he easily destroys an entire squadron, Amber tells Sadahu to start his attack by tearing through the monsters so he can get close enough for a surprise attack. The girls then take turns wishing him luck before Hime gives him the signature kiss and promises to wait until he returns. Moments later, he clears up the final group of monsters and immediately attacks the Abyss King, but he blocks the Sword of Light and claims to have been expecting him. Just then, the rings start talking and assure Sadahu that he will win before merging all 5 rings into one. With its power filled to the max, Sadahu unleashes the most powerful attack he can muster and slices the Abyss King in half. However, their excitement turns to terror when the Abyss King says he will have to do a lot more than that to win. Before the shock fully sets in, Sadahu loses consciousness, so Granite and the others immediately start running to save him. Unfortunately, the Abyss King manages to drain most of his life force away before they get to him. The next moment, he summons another army of monsters to crush them, and Granite almost becomes ground beef, but Amber uses her control over the earth to save her while also taking out some of the monsters. As the rest start closing in, Sadahu tries to use his ring again, but the effects of the Abyss King's magic knocks him out. After a dream where he sees flashes of his life with Hime before getting attacked by the Abyss, he wakes in the sky and sees Alabaster. He then accepts that they must be heading to a meeting with the big guy upstairs, but Alabaster assures him that they are very much alive before he sees everyone else. After hearing how Alabaster swooped in at the last moment to save them, Sadahu asks if Mars also survived, and Alabaster says it was all thanks to Smara, who saved them shortly after he opened the portal. As she suddenly loses it and starts yapping about how much she loves Alabaster, Sadahu and the girls ask if the other nations are still in one piece. Alabaster then says they still don't have much to worry about, aside from the fact that the Abyss King has been sending wave after wave of monsters. With that said, he assures Sadahu that they will definitely win before they reach Hime's home country. As soon as they land, a girl runs up to ask Sadahu if they should continue hiding, and he promises that their world is as good as saved. However, he and the girls immediately ask Alabaster to explain why all 5 rings were not enough to stop the Abyss King. After saying that he had never even heard of the dark rings before they started popping up, Alabaster tells them not to worry because their only option is to increase the love they all have for Sadahu before their next face-off against the Abyss King. Later that night, a maid escorts Sadahu to his room and wishes him a good night before he walks in and finds his harem of juicy princesses eagerly waiting for a piping. He immediately considers running away, but after Sapphire starts an argument with Granite, he realizes that nothing has really changed, including the fact that his virginity will survive one more night. The next day, he meets up with Hime, and she decides to tell him a little bit about her family before they get to the spot where her parents were buried. After she says something about having a little sister, Alabaster shows up with the others to tell her about a powerful magician he called to help get her training started. Just then, they all watch as a bussy baddie named Ravri drops in and says she is actually Hime's younger sister. If you made it this far, comment which of the girls will actually get to clap Sadahu first, and don't forget to turn on post notifications after subscribing to be the first to see our next recap.